It is Tout Wars weekend, and I'm here with Chris Crawford today on the RotoWire Fantasy Baseball Podcast. Welcome to the RotoWire Fantasy Baseball Podcast. We are sponsored by Fantrax, the most customizable free commissioner service in fantasy sports, and Underdog Fantasy, home of the biggest best ball contest in the industry. I'm Clay Link here with Chris Crawford, filling in for Todd Zola today. Chris, really appreciate you taking some time. I am in New York in a small hotel room recording this right now.
Awesome.
It's good to be here. You may hear some noise of just the city as we record, but it's very cool. Yeah. Great to do a pod for the first time ever with you, Chris.
Yeah, I'm excited to be here. I hope that RotoWire folks aren't going to be too sick of my voice. This is the second of 4 straight that'll be on for this week. But this has been a blast, and I really appreciate you having me on, my friend.
Yeah, thanks for, not only that, but just, coming aboard, and welcome to the team.
Thank you so much. Yeah,
publicly, I've done that yet.
I really appreciate it. It's been an absolute blast. These guys are the absolute best. It's been great to have a few folks like Ryan Boyer and Drew Silva join us as well that I've worked for a very long time. And I'm just thrilled and can't wait to be here for a very long time.
Absolutely. We're thrilled to have you. You guys are kind of coming in like the New World Order, like hostile takeover. No, I'm kidding.
No, not at all.
We're thrilled to have you. And, Drew Silva, Ryan Boyer, you guys are all doing great work on breaking news and podcasts, and we're all pumped, man. And
appreciate it.
We'll start today with a bit of bad news, though, in the baseball world. Big news of the week, Edwin Diaz went down celebrating that WBC win. Just brutal for MLB, WBC, and, of course, the player. Underwent surgery to repair his right patella tendon, out for the season. So, this is why you ideally draft late in draft season if you can. It's a bummer, certainly. But do you think it's Daniel Robertson closing there for the Mets?
This is a tough situation because yeah, no problem. Daniel Robinson might get some save opportunities if necessary, but I think he's got to be the favorite right now. I can imagine that they maybe go closer by committee here. It's not a great situation. I also imagine after how much money they invested in this team that they are going to be scouring the trade market for somebody. I can't help but think like someone like David Bednar or something like that makes an awful lot of sense here. But I suppose if I'm drafting a reliever here, I'm probably going with Robertson. All in all, though, it's probably a situation I'm staying away from. Unfortunately, I am not one of those people who drafted early and took Edwin Diaz as not only my first closer off the board, he was the first pitcher I took off the board in the league I value the absolute most, and that stinks. But, hopefully I can get a share of Robertson at some point later in the draft because I'm not attacking him by any means. But if you were somebody who's playing, really hoping for those save opportunities, I think Robertson has to be that guy. But I would definitely be looking at other options over those guys for sure.
So you're not going to be one of those guys jumping Robertson up your board.
No.
I respect that.
Yeah, and there's the stuff is there for him to be a solid closer, and there's no doubt about the fact that the Mets are going to be really good, so there's going to be save opportunities there. But until I hear Buck Showalter say David Robertson is our closer, it's probably a situation that I'm going to stay away from. It's but what a bummer, because Edwin Diaz is such a fun pitcher to watch, and something that could have happened, a lot of people want to hate on the WBC. This could have happened in any type of situation. Goodness knows we've seen plenty of injuries in exhibition games this season, but such a bummer. I'll ask you this too, Clay. Is he still going to be your number one reliever at the start of next season or close to that? Or how much worry do you have from something where you're going to miss an entire season?
Yeah, that's tough. It's hard to think about what the closer board will look like this time next year.
That's a good point.
If he's in spring, if he's made a couple spring appearances, I'll probably have him up there. But yeah, it is hard to just put a guy right back at top of the board at that position when he's missed an entire year. So
yeah,
that's really hard to tell. Of course, they do have Adam Ottavino there, but Ottavino's command and control can waver.
Sure.
And I wouldn't really be interested in drafting him. And I'm with you. Like, until we get official word that it is Robertson, I'm probably not going to be the one getting super aggressive in drafts to come. But if it eases your pain at all, having Diaz, I drafted him in TGFBI with my 3rd round pick. So
yeah,
you live and you learn. I was so anti like early closers a few years ago. Now I'm not only buying in, but I'm getting burned by them. So
it's such a brutal thing to do, because you love those early drafts in some regards because it's so much fun to do. The drafting, let's be honest, it's one of the funnest things to do in the sport. But then you can't help but think, gosh, I wish we would have waited a couple of weeks to do this, unfortunately. But yeah, that's a really tough situation. And again, like that team should be really good. So whoever is actually getting save opportunities is more than fantasy relevant. But there's just a lot of volatility here. I could also see guys like Bryce Montes de Oca is a guy who I've really liked his stuff, and I could see him being an option in the late innings for those guys when he's healthy as well. There's just too many options. And again, because the Mets invested so much in that team, I cannot help but think that Steve Cohen is telling dudes, we got to make a deal for a legitimate closer, and we got to do it right now.
Yeah, I think that's really smart to point out, because I've kind of heard, or at least seen some tweets that maybe they will explore options outside the organization.
Sure.
To help bolster that bullpen there in New York. Yordan Alvarez, Chris, took on-field BP this morning for the first time this spring. So that's a big step forward. He's been dealing with that hand issue. Well, he's got old man knees and old man hands for some reason. I don't really understand why, but I lowered him in my rankings. I have Yordan Alvarez currently 16th overall. Where do you fall right now on Yordan now that he seems to be trending back in the right direction?
I think that's about right. I would have him somewhere between like 14 and 18. The offensive potential is through the roof. I mean, I just look at every time I need to feel better about something, I look at Yordan Alvarez's Baseball Savant page just to see the 100, 100, 100, 100, 100, 100, 100.
Yeah, it's like going on a vacation on a really hot. Sun's beaming down.
Yeah, exactly. That is great for Baseball Savant, not great for the 5-day weather forecast. It's the thing with Alvarez is that there is kind of a little bit of an injury history here, and the fact that he is just a 4-category player. Like, anything you get from him in stolen bases is the benefit of benefits. And, you have to weigh that together. There's no doubt about the fact that he's going to, if he's healthy, help you in average, home runs, RBI, because that Houston lineup is so good. But you're not going to get anything in that 5th category. So I got to put a few outfielders ahead of him. It's kind of interesting to me. Like, who are some guys that, like, you bumped ahead of Yordan Alvarez because of the injury situation?
Well, Bo Bichette is one.
Nice.
I bumped Austin Riley ahead of him. So I have Riley as like a 1-2 turn type of guy in a 15.
Nice. Yeah.
I would take like Betts over him, and like Machado even too.
Yeah, that's all of those guys really, except for Riley, have a chance to help in that stolen base category, and I think
that's a bit.
At least a little bit for sure. So it'll be really interesting to me. Bichette, to me, is being so undervalued right now as a guy who can steal bases, and I think will run more, especially with the new rules. And he's said all the right things. Of course, we've heard people say all the right things about stolen bases before, and it ends up being nothing. I'm looking at you, Wander Franco. But I think Alvarez is a guy that I'd be looking at in that turn spot. And, if somebody wants to go higher than that and go draft him in 10th or 9th or whatever, I get it. And there's no doubt about it that person could be richly rewarded. But you also have the risk of the fact that he might be limited to 115 to 120 games, if only because I think the Astros really want to make sure this dude is healthy for the postseason run, which, whether you like it or not, is assuredly happening.
Yeah, I finally come around on Bichette. of course, I like the player and love the skills, but just come around on him as a first rounder this year. Late first round. I don't have him quite as high as Todd Zola. I think Zola has him like 6th overall.
Oh, wow.
But I have come around to Bichette as a real nice, late first round pick if you can make it work. Clarke Schmidt, Chris, absolutely dominant yesterday against the Pirates. So take that with a little bit of a grain of salt. Sure. But 5 perfect innings, 7 Ks, and there's an opening there in that rotation in New York. Do you think Clarke Schmidt seizes a opening day rotation spot with the Yankees?
I think at this point it's definitely his to lose. He's a pretty interesting arm to me. It's worth pointing out that this guy was drafted, I believe, 16th overall in 2017 out of South Carolina. And he was drafted after having Tommy John surgery. His stuff is unquestionable. And he's really a guy who relies on that slider, which is, as we all know, become the pitch of pitches that everybody loves to throw right now. But he's got a good fastball. If you look at his numbers last year, they weren't great, but like his expected batting average was well above average. His expected slugging was well above average. His whiff rate was well above average. Again, the good fastball. He gets spin on both of his pitches, which obviously is going to be key. Against left-handed pitchers, it's very important to have that movement, especially in Yankee Stadium where there is that short porch. Does he have command issues at times? You bet. And that's going to be something that you have to be cognizant of for sure if you're playing in a league where you're looking at whip as a big stat for you. We'll have to avoid the barrels more. 12 percentile is not what you're looking for in the barrel rate. But all this stuff here is for him to be a competent starter. The Yankees should be a very good team, despite the fact that, fortunately, I think we're getting an injury update to write about on RotoWire for the Yankees like every 45 minutes. At least it seems that way. But there's no doubt that Clarke Schmidt has the stuff to succeed. And at this point, I think he's lock, maybe too strong of a word for the rotation, but a strong favorite for sure.
Yeah, I do worry about the walks we saw a little bit last year, but doesn't seem like he has like poor control at all. Just they were a little high last year.
Yeah.
A pretty good track record of command and control throughout his professional career. So, yeah, he's a guy that in the Tout Wars head-to-head, which favors pitching so heavily, it really pushes pitching up. I'm going to be looking at Clarke Schmidt as a maybe $1 guy in a 12-team mixer. Maybe I'll get bid up on him for $1.
Yeah,
he's a guy I'd like to throw out to see what it will cost me.
I was just going to say that makes a ton of sense in a salary cap league to make that the guy the $1 bid and see how aggressive people really want to be. And I know some people don't love people that it could. What's your strategy on that? Like, do you think that's uncouth, or do you think putting out those dollar guys to see if people are going to overpay is a perfectly fine strategy? I'm curious from a true fantasy expert, what your thoughts are on that.
Well, I don't know about that, but it's, look, I don't think it's like, poor form or anything. I do think, though, it's kind of like you don't want to do that too much or else you may be overspending too early on. I think you want to, maybe do that for 1 or 2 guys, but I think generally you want to wait and kind of play your cards right and play them close to the vest and save those $1 guys to the end.
Sure.
If you get bid up at the end, you get bid up, but I think you're more likely to get bid up if you throw them early.
That makes sense. That does make sense. But yeah, I think Schmidt makes a ton of sense in those type of leagues, especially just because he's going to have that early shot. And, like even with like Nestor Cortez coming back, it looks like it should be just fine. I think the Yankees are going to want to be careful with some of their arms. And I think that gives Clarke Schmidt a really good opportunity to earn this spot. Do I worry that he could be moved from that rotation spot at the slightest sign of struggle or complete hell for that Yankee rotation? Of course. And that would be the reason why I'm not overdrafting Clarke Schmidt. But there's easy path to fantasy relevance, especially in AL only leagues or deeper formats where you can get him for $1 or the late rounds.
Yeah, I'd like to play a little bit of chicken with Clarke Schmidt, but if there are any Yankees fans in our room on Sunday, I might have to throw them out just to see the fireworks,
There you go.
See what happens. But he'll be a guy that and if he goes for a lot, then I could just pivot to other, late pitching sleepers. So
Absolutely.
He may be the one guy that I do kind of throw out early.
Nice.
Let's pause briefly. I'll bring you a quick word from our friends at Underdog Fantasy. The fantasy baseball season is underway, and there's no better place to play than Underdog Fantasy, the easiest place to play fantasy baseball. Right now, Underdog has MLB best ball tournaments live, including the Dinger, which has $500,000 in total prizes. In best ball, all you do is join a contest, draft your team, and that's it. There are no waivers, no trades, and no in-season management. Draft 20 rounds of players and get the best cumulative scores in your starting lineup. Starting lineup consists of 3 pitchers, 3 infielders, 3 outfielders, and 1 flex each week of the regular season. Getting started is simple. Go to UnderdogFantasy.com, sign up with the promo code RWMLB, and not only will Underdog double your initial deposit up to $100, but you'll also get 6 months of our RotoWire subscription for free. Again, that's Underdog Fantasy, promo code RWMLB. Draft your $100,000 Dinger team today. And Chris and I are going to be talking a little bit later about Underdog specifically and some of the most head-scratching ADPs on Underdog. Of course, it is a different game, so the ADP does differ significantly from regular Roto 5x5 ADP, but we'll look at some of those and kind of discuss why they are where they are and why they are kind of puzzling at first glance. Chris, Kodai Senga, right index finger tendonitis, but he returned to action yesterday, struck out 5 over 3 innings against the Nats, rather. So Kodai Senga's trending back in the right direction. You know, they're expecting big things from him in Queens. Is he a guy you're going to be drafting, Kodai Senga?
Yes, and I think that he's one of the most volatile options, but I cannot ignore the potential reward for him for the reasons we talked about with Edwin Diaz. Like, the Mets are going to provide a ton of win opportunities for this guy. And the stuff that I saw when I got to watch some stuff, and I luckily got to talk to some scouts in Japan as well, it's really good. And it is good enough to miss bats. It's good enough to initiate weak contact. Do I think that he may be a guy who gets some 4 or 5 inning starts, especially early on? Yeah, I do think that's something to be cognizant of, just especially for people who are, the win category. That may not be a great thing if he's leaving games early, but he has the stuff to be relevant in every pitching category. So absolutely somebody I'm targeting. I might want to have something as a backup. Like, he's not going to be my SP1 or my SP2, obviously, but he's somebody I definitely want to be on my typical 9-person pitching staff, with the caveat that I think that there could be some ups and downs early on. But there is no doubt about it that when that guy is at his best, he's going to give hitters fits. And he'll be a tough guy for hitters early on, too, because nobody really has a great look at this guy. So that's another thing that I'm always looking at for. It can be an advantage. It can be a disbenefit as well, because, hitters could be aggressive against those guys because they don't know really what to see. But I really like Kodai Senga as a mid to late round option, as somebody who can really help fantasy teams.
Nice. Really good stuff. And I'm kind of having a hard time figuring out where to slot him in amongst the player pool, because obviously he's an unknown to us in the States for the most part. And he kind of has had a little bit of a up and down spring. I remember when he first threw his first bullpen session of the spring, there were some quotes coming out of Mets camp that maybe the Mets were a little concerned about maybe a little bit of an adjustment period, adjusting to the higher slope of the mound and whatnot. But then he came out in live BP and has looked great, and same with games. So it seems like that ghost forkball thing is going to be doing a lot of heavy lifting. Can you tell us real quick what the other pitches are for Senga? I forget.
Sure. He's going to be throwing a fastball, obviously, and he's going to be offering kind of 2 different breaking balls, one more of a cutter slider and then a more traditional curve, that fork ball, and then he's got kind of like a palm change as well. He can come at you with a bunch of different stuff, but really it's that fork ball that's going to be that swing and miss pitch. And I don't know about you, Clay, the fork ball is like my favorite pitch to watch, because it can make hitters look so stupid. And that's what I love to see, is that pitch that can make hitters feel so stupid. And the nice thing is too, is he can throw it for strikes, or he can bury it down in the zone. And when you can locate it It's much tougher to sit on something when you know that it could be thrown for a strike, or if it has that chance to look exactly like a fastball until that very last minute and fall down. So he's got a complete arsenal. I imagine that the Mets might be saying, hey, let's work on 2 to 3 pitches, and then we can kind of work stuff in, especially after some missed time. But he's going to have plenty of arsenal to throw at hitters. It's just a matter of him commanding it and also making that adjustment to the baseball mostly. I mean, that is a huge thing. And he's kind of come out and said that that's one of the reasons why the indexed finger tendonitis was bothering him, was that making that adjustment to the new baseball. But based on what he's shown since coming back from that injury, doesn't look like that's going to be a very long adjustment.
Something to keep an eye on, though, that the fact that the ball, I imagine it's probably like a little slicker or something, but
smaller.
Yeah.
The size of the baseball, especially with a fork ball, the difference of holding it, for those watching up here compared to down here, that makes a big difference. And the seams as well, that can unfortunately often lead to blister problems because you're not used to holding the baseball in a certain path. But I think he is making that adjustment, but of course, something that you have to be worrying about.
Of course. So it's not just the ghost forkball that he has, but that will be the primary swing and miss offering that he pushes up there to opposing hitters. So
absolutely.
Yeah, again, Kodai Senga pitched yesterday and was impressive. Now, we talked at the top of the show about the Edwin Diaz WBC injury. Really sucks, but a couple other WBC notes real quick. Padres manager Bob Melvin expressed some concerns about Yu Darvish's usage in the WBC. So apparently Darvish pitched in relief at some point, but he's just not getting the innings in the WBC to satisfy Melvin and the Padres. If you're on the clock right now in a draft, Chris, does that give you a little pause if you have Darvish queued up? Like maybe he's not really cut loose at the very start of the season to go 6+?
It's a little bit worrying. I'd probably use it as a tiebreaker. If you were like I know that a bunch of drafts that I've done on our good buddy Fantrax, they have Yu Darvish and Zach Gallen listed next to each other. Probably taking Gallen now as that guy, just because. And you know what? I might take Gallen anyway. I am such a huge fan of that guy and his stuff. Wish that he played on a little better baseball team. He's somebody I really like for 2024 because I think the Diamondbacks are building something really special over there. But for 2023, I wish they gave him a little better win chances. But I'm still drafting over guys like Tristan McKenzie or Hunter Green or pitchers of that ilk, just because he has such a great track record. Yeah, it's going to be a little bit of a struggle early, and maybe I would consider, if I draft Yu Darvish, maybe you sit him and see how things look. I know that's risky to do for somebody you're probably taking in the 4th to 6th round, but I'm still overall fine with Yu Darvish. It's just something like if you were using it as a tiebreaker, I think that it's totally fine to be at least a little bit concerned about what's going on there.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think that's well put. It's just kind of a tiebreaker right now. It's not something I'm really worried about, but just something to keep in mind. Maybe it's kind of like blasphemy to think like maybe I'll bench my 4th round pick for week 1, but just don't know how deep he'll go. I do think with a veteran like that, he'll probably push to go 5.
Yes,
but it'll be up to the skipper, of course, as it always is.
Well, let's take a real quick break. We'll pause briefly and bring you a quick word from our Blue Wire sponsors. All right, we are back on the RotoWire Fantasy Baseball podcast. Clay Link here with Chris Crawford today. Todd Zola, he's in New York as well. I don't know what he's doing, but he was busy, and I thought I'd spare him a show when he's got the Tout Wars show to run here. Now, Chris, you mentioned that you're in on drafting Kodai Senga. What about Masataka Yoshida? He hit his first home run of the WBC. I drafted him on my TGFBI team. I drafted him on my online championship team. And James Anderson was saying that was one of the picks that he didn't really like. I'm kind of hoping that there is some over-the-fence power as he showed in the WBC. We'll see how it translates. And these guys are so hard to,
to gauge as far as what we can expect in the year one coming over. It's just such a transition, not only baseball-wise, but life-wise. You're in on Senga. Are you in on Masataka Yoshida of the Red Sox?
To a lesser extent, but yes. I think that he's somebody I'm really looking at in on-base percentage leagues because he has such a good approach at the plate, and he's also somebody who has pretty minimal swing and miss. That is somebody that I think is going to hit for average. I think he's probably going to be a decent run option. Real questions about the power, and it's more about just the fact that I don't know if he's going to be able to drive the baseball the same way that he was in Japan. And this was a guy who was, at his top, he was hitting 29 homers as his career high. That's certainly, if you hit 29 home runs from him this year, congratulations. I think he's more of that 15 to 20 guy. It's a very similar skill set, I think, to what we saw from Andrew Benintendi. And there's nothing wrong with Andrew Benintendi. I think Andrew Benintendi provides more real life value than Yoshida does. But certainly a guy that I'd want on my bench, especially, and see how things go. If you're drafting him as like a third starting outfielder or even a fourth starting outfielder, I think that's probably a mistake. I'm not sure he's a top 50 play this year, but I do think that there is just enough upside in that bat, and particularly in on-base percentage leagues, to suggest that he's worth that roster spot.
There was some talk initially in camp that maybe he leads off for the Red Sox, but it looks like now he's probably slotted into that fifth spot. Does that sound about right?
Yeah, that does sound about right.
Yeah.
And I'd much rather have him at that top spot because I do think that would be much better for that run category, even though like Boston's middle of the order is not, all due respect to Rafi Devers, it's not exactly murderer's row in my personal opinion. Mm-hmm. But I would like to have him hitting at that top just because more at-bats, more chances to get those run opportunities. But I really do have some question marks about how this power is going to translate. It is nice to see that he's driving the ball in the World Baseball Classic, and there's no doubt about his talent and his ability to make contact. How much of that is going to be hard contact is a real question mark. He'd be a guy I would like to see get some at-bats at the end of spring training to see how this is going to translate as well.
The Red Sox seem to think there's at least gap power in that bat, and they like what he's shown so far in camp before he left for the WBC. So,
right.
I know that there was other teams around baseball that were perplexed, to say the least, about the amount of money the Red Sox gave Yoshida. But
yes,
the Red Sox believe, I guess. So,
yeah.
And look, that for what it's worth.
And the Red Sox have made some questionable decisions in the past few years, but their scouting eye is really good. There is a reason why they have been able to have, do they have on and off years? You bet. It's kind of interesting to watch just how many 71 win years turn into 93 wins the next year with the Boston Red Sox. But there's no doubt about their scouting eye. And if they like Yoshida, that is something to at least put in the cap for him because they may have some questionable financial flexibility decisions looking at you, Marcus Lindbetz, but I am not doubting the fact that they know who is a good baseball player for sure.
Well, I got to tell you, Chris, a guy that I wasn't really considering much, Joey Meneses. Then he goes out and has that 2-homer game in the WBC. That doesn't really change much for me, but it has changed the market.
Interesting.
As I'd expect. Jeff Erickson, sorry to cut you off, Chris.
No, that's okay.
I just was going to say Jeff Erickson mentioned that after that 2-homer game in the WBC, it would affect the market. His price would rise, and kind of looks like rolling my eyes, but he was right. I was checking out the ADP report at RotoWire, and green arrow up on Joey Meneses. So even one game like that, high-profile setting, can change the market.
Yeah, and some of that is I try not to be somebody who is swayed by small samples. But let's look at what Joey Meneses did last year. It was only 240 plate appearances, but 324, 367, 563, 13 home runs, a hard hit rate of 46.8, was barreling the baseball at a very strong level. Expected slugging percentage would have been well up there. Weighted on base average, expected weighted on base average, not quite as high at 330 compared to 395. This guy can hit. It was never a question mark with Joey Meneses of whether or not he had offensive ability. The reason he was kind of slept on was he was limited to first base, basically, and he just never showed that upside. But he's shown that upside in the World Baseball Classic, and he really showed it for a relatively small portion last year. Am I buying him as like a top 100 player next year? I can't go that high, but I do think he's somebody who is absolutely should be on rosters because he's going to hit in the middle of a dreadful Washington Nationals lineup, but he's going to hit in the middle of that. And he has shown the ability to drive the baseball and to hit for average. It's time to take it seriously. I understand the hesitancy of somebody who has that small of sample, and we're talking about the World Baseball Classic, but we talk about this stuff with spring training as well. So, but it's more about what he did in 2022 is the reason I'm targeting Meneses in the middle of drafts more than the fact that he's been playing very well for Team Mexico.
Yeah, even though I'm conscious of this, I still have trouble kind of battling it. I have a tendency to put some of these guys into their little boxes to help myself make sense of these guys. And
sure,
I think I just kind of I've been putting Meneses in that box with other late bloomers, like the guys who you've seen so many of them come in and fizzle quickly, even like Luke Voigt, who had a longer window than most, but the Patrick Wisdoms and who was the other Cub a few years ago? I'm forgetting his name, but I guess I'm just kind of putting him in that box when he's his own player. It's not like a paintbrush that gets applied universally to these late bloomers. It doesn't necessarily mean anything for his future.
No.
Crawled through the minor leagues for 10 years. Maybe he has what it takes to stick around. And bad team context, though, that's one thing that kind of hurts. But, you can still extract value from poor teams.
Yeah, for sure. And like I was just looking at the other day about like his ability last year. He can hit everything. Like his expected slugging percentage, his slugging percentage on fastballs was 534. Off breaking pitches, it was 609, and off speed pitches, so basically changeups, it was 594. So he was driving the baseball against everything that he's seen, and that's super impressive for his first real chance at major league action. The expected numbers don't exactly back up that he is a elite hitter, but we don't need him to be a 930 OPS guy to be fantasy relevant. We just need him to be in that 815 to 820 range above average. And he's going to need that because he's not going to give you any stolen bases. So, and the RBI chances again for a AA baseball team outside of a few guys are going to be limited. But I do think he can be a 3-category player, and that certainly makes him worth drafting. And also should be eligible at first base and outfield, which is not a bad thing to have at all.
Yeah, that's actually really underrated, first base outfield. Because then that actually makes them eligible for, I guess technically 4 spots on your roster, because then corner and utility.
Corner, yeah.
Yeah. So
great call.
That's, maybe, I haven't really bumped him up my rankings, but Meneses, maybe I'll have to give him more credit than I've been giving him lately. Well, Chris, let's transition a little bit and talk about Underdog Fantasy. Todd and I have been doing this on Fridays, quick little 10-minute segment, so we'll wrap this up in about 10 minutes on the dot. But I thought our topic today would be the most head-scratching ADPs on Underdog, the most puzzling. Again, it is a different game, so we'll kind of explain why these ADPs are the way they are, but also give our thoughts on maybe why they're a little off, even with the scoring settings and roster settings here. My number one is Paul Goldschmidt. And look, I love Goldie. He won the MVP last year, but his ADP on Underdog is 16.7, ahead of guys like Manny Machado, Austin Riley. And while I love Goldie, it feels like that's 17.6. That feels like chasing a little bit to me. So I don't like Goldie at 17.6. That one higher than his normal ADP. And, when he gets lumped in with guys like Machado and Riley in the corner or in the infield on Underdog, it just doesn't make sense for me to be taking him over those guys. Who's your first most head-scratching ADP on Underdog?
I'm going to go with somebody who I think is being underdrafted in the league, and it's Bobby Witt Jr. And I do understand that because of different rules that he's maybe more valuable in a standard 5x5 league, but I'm a big believer in Witt's talent. And I'm looking, the last time I looked, his underdog draft precision was 32.2. That's way too low. I'm taking Bobby Witt over Paul Goldschmidt in any type of best ball format or any type of format. I am such a big believer in his talent. I think he's going to be a guy who hits much more power. I think he's going to steal a ton of bases. There is the risk of getting caught there as well. But I am a big believer in Bobby Witt. And by the way, I totally agree with you on Paul Goldschmidt. That is far too high. And I love the player, but that is more of a second round talent than a guy that I think should be going that high. But yeah, I'm all in on Bobby Witt Jr.
That's interesting because usually with underdog and other points formats, I'm out on the speedsters, but
okay.
Witt may have enough in that bat to kind of compensate, because with a lot of times, even though you get points for steals, and in my experience, those points aren't enough to make up the difference of just the pure hitting ability in large part. But of course, Bobby Witt can swing it like a stud too.
Right, and that's oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, no, go ahead.
I just wanted to say that's why I'm like in NFBC leagues, he's often going as a first round player. That's why I certainly wouldn't have him that high, but 32, like over some of these other guys, it doesn't add up for me. I really would be targeting him in that 15 to 20 range if I was playing in best ball. Sorry to interrupt.
Not at all. Next up for me, a couple outfielders. Now, if you've played on Underdog, there's a mad dash for outfielders because they dry up so quickly. And when you have all the infielders lumped together, you can find some pretty good infielders late, but that's not so much the case for outfielders. But even so, I think 31.7 ADP on Cedric Mullins is too high. That feels like getting caught up in the mad rush for outfielders too much and not really seeing the field clearly. So that one feels like just getting caught up in the outfielder madness too much. So I'll pass on him. And Corbin Carroll too. I love him in Roto, but at 43.2,
yeah,
another one where I feel like you're chasing the outfield a little too much. And I get that you have to fill those spots, but I think you can compile your team better by either drafting some outfielders earlier and not getting caught with Corbin at 43, or attacking the middle tier a little better. I just think Corbin Carroll should fall closer to that middle tier than the top tier.
Yeah, it's weird to see that he's only 11 spots below Bobby Witt Jr., by the way. Mm-hmm. Again, I hate to keep hammering that home. I am a big believer in Bobby Witt Jr. A pitcher that I think is going too low is Zach Wheeler, average draft spot of 57. I love Wheeler. I think the Phillies are going to be, I do know the Bryce Harper injury is going to hurt them, but I do think that team is loaded. And the NL East is a tough division for all the reasons that we talked about earlier, but Wheeler has swing and miss stuff. He has a quality defense actually finally behind him. I think it's not great. Sorry, Keith Hernandez. It's still not great, but it is better. And I just think that this is a guy who's going below arms like Framber Valdez and Christian Javier. That's too much chasing the win for me. I would have him closer into that top 10 spot for starting pitchers on Underdog, and he's not going in that range. And I think take advantage of that, because if he is falling outside of that range, he could be a massive steal for best ball leagues.
I like that one. I considered Wheeler for my list as well, but didn't quite make the cut. But glad he made the show in this segment, one way or another. I got Zach Gallen, and you mentioned Gallen earlier in the show. ADP on Underdog 74. Feels like people just rushing for outfielders, rushing to fill some infield spots as the infielders fall as a result of the outfielders getting pushed up. And then Gallen falls in this kind of dead zone at 74 where, it just seems like a screaming value to me. So I love grabbing Gallen. If you could pop him maybe 6 to 8 picks earlier than this, I would love to get him on pretty much every team if I can, as long as this ADP holds up at 74.
Yeah, I like that call. And one of the arms that's going ahead of him that I definitely think is being overdrafted, at least in Underdog, Robbie Ray. And I hate to say that as a Seattle Mariner fan. 65.4 and going ahead of arms like Fried and Gallen and Tristan McKenzie and Hunter Green. I can't do that. And I do think Seattle will give him some win chances. I have some concerns about whether or not he's going to be the command guy. The 2021 version of Robbie Ray is not happening again. He was good in 2022, and I think he will have win chances for, sure hoping for my grandma, a ton of win chances for the Seattle Mariners. But ahead of guys like Julio Urias, Max Fried, Zach Gallen, that just doesn't make any sense to me.
Yeah, that's a good one. He's, it was funny. He had that great 2021. I expected so much regression with the control.
Yeah.
The walk rate held pretty steady with the home run still an issue. But
yes,
if he gives a little bit back on the walk side and then you had the homers, it could get kind of ugly for him. One guy I'm fading at ADP on Underdog, Logan Webb at 100.1. Just a bad team, I think. I look at that team, and it looks pretty nasty, honestly. And, I want that upside. I like Logan Webb's skills, but at 100.1, I just feel like I'd rather have a guy with more upside. I guess that's not like super early, but I'm kind of worried about that team and the blow-up potential of the Giants this year.
The win chances could be lacking. I do think that the Giants, this is such a great year for the balanced schedule that they're not going to have to play the Padres and the Dodgers as often as they normally would. I think that could help him, but I don't see a ton of upside there. Certainly somebody I like more in a 5x5 than somebody who's going to be like winning me leagues in a best ball format. This one hurts me a little bit. Brian Reynolds is going too high. It's as somebody who I really like, and I hate saying it because I beat this drum for a very long time as a prospect guy that he was well underdrafted out of Vanderbilt. But as the 20th outfielder off the board and a 20th outfielder off the board in Underdog just doesn't make a whole heck of a lot of sense for me. I would rather be targeting guys like, Anthony Santander is a guy who I thought was going to be underdrafted. I want as much as I can have of that guy right now, just based on the fact that he has been absolutely crushing the ball and has excellent metrics. Giancarlo Stanton, Stephen Kwan, these are all guys that I'm probably taking over Reynolds because the Pirates stink. If he's traded, I will go ahead and say this was a terrible take. But a guy who's going 35th overall, just a couple spots again below Bobby Witt Jr., I think that's just too high.
I'm with you. I've come to the point where I haven't had an outfielder yet, and I've considered him. And I just thought, no, I can't do that, and I can't square that. Sure. That need for an outfielder with the skills at that range. My last few here: Tommy Edman, ADP 112.4. Just need more upside, and plus he gets again lumped in with infield. You only need 3, and I just don't think he's going to clear the bar to make it into your starting lineup more than 6 to 8 weeks of the season. Then Drew Rasmussen, ADP 173, way too low. Go get you some Drew Rasmussen in your life, folks.
Yeah, Drew Rasmussen's a great call. And over the weekends, we've been doing these category previews, and we've had Rasmussen as a sleeper for ERA and WHIP. All about that guy for sure. Just closing out for me real quick, a couple of pitchers that I am really reticent about drafting high. Logan Gilbert, I hate doing another Seattle Mariner, but gave up so much hard contact last year and the limited shift. Could he be a guy who takes that next step forward in his second full professional season? I do think so, but there is a lot of risk that comes with that reward. And then Kyle Wright. Shoulders, man. I know he's looked really good at towards the end of the season, but Kyle Wright is somebody that if you're doing a tiebreaker type thing, you should be really looking at that shoulder thing, because even though he's saying all the right things and they're talking about him being just fine, take it with a lot of salt because there is an awful lot of risk that comes with shoulder injuries.
Very true. Well, awesome stuff. That'll do it for our Underdog Best Ball segment. Thanks for filling in on that this week, Chris. Really appreciate that. And I'm with you on Kyle Wright. I was talking with James Anderson about him, and I thought, well, now that he's trending back up health-wise, maybe his ADP will rise. But James made a good point that, ADP kind of gets set right after the season, and he was he was the only 20-game winner in the majors last year. So ADP kind of this self-manifesting thing where it kind of eats itself. And,
yes.
Maybe that's not the case. Maybe he should just be steadily dropping.
Yeah.
As people do more research and really look into the kind of player he is. Great year last year. He'll always have that as a moment in time. But
yeah, for sure.
When we're projecting, it's hard to project that level of performance. All right, real quick, one last read, and then we'll wrap things up on the show today. Fantrax, the most customizable fantasy platform in the industry, offering the greatest fantasy experience for your dynasty keeper, redraft, and best ball leagues. If you're coming from another service, Fantrax makes it easy. If you're sick of your commish service, and I hear you if you are, you can carry over to Fantrax. They make it super easy to import your leagues. If you do some sort of wacky scoring system or 6x6, 4x4, they can make it so that your league is all set up in a flash. You can import your current leagues and customize as needed. Fantrax offers the most in-depth player pool in the industry, which I love. I'm always getting emails about players being added to the minor league pool. And do you need a customizable service? Well, Fantrax is the one to go to. Waivers, categories, scoring system, schedule. Fantrax offers custom solutions for all that and more. It's all free. And also, if you're a Vlad Jr. mark like myself, you could sign up for free and be entered to win an official MLB signed jersey from Vladimir Guerrero Jr. Simply go to fantrax.com/rotowire and sign up today. That's fantrax.com/rotowire. Fantrax, the home of fantasy sports. So a few other things, Chris. Joe Musgrove may only miss 1 to 2 starts. He's got that toe issue, may start as soon as like April 6th. You bumping him back up to where he was before he dropped that weight on his toe?
Maybe not all the way up, but pretty darn close. Like, this guy was really good last year. And again, you've got to talk about the team that he's playing for. I think the Padres are going to be very, very good. I mean, he was basically in the red in everything but fastball velocity and extension last year. I don't know if he's going to quite repeat his performance last year, especially with the fact that he, is not an elite swing and miss guy. But I think he's got a quality team behind him. He puts the ball in play, but it's weak contact stuff. He shouldn't be a guy who's too affected by the shift. Yeah, I think just Joe Musgrove absolutely deserves to be, if he's not quite where he was drafted prior to the injury, at least in that range.
I'm with you 100%. I think if this continues to offer a little bit of a discount, I think you scoop him up, grab Joe Musgrove, because this, it was a toe. It's not like it was an arm or an oblique or anything.
Right.
And making a quick recovery. So if my draft room's a little hesitant on Joe Musgrove, I'll certainly dabble. I'm kind of hoping the room's a little hesitant in the Tout Wars head-to-head, because again, the pitching is so valuable in that you get a point for every out recorded. So
massive.
Yeah, that's, of course, know your system. James used to make fun of me because I would always say, know your rules. It's fantasy 101 stuff. I get that it's really basic stuff, but some people still just don't, going from roto to another format, they just don't really account for the changes in format as much as they should. I've found.
Nobody reads the opening. Nobody reads the opening paragraph, and nobody reads their new league's rules.
Exactly, and so that's just one little small, inefficiency I've found among players is
for sure.
If they're not playing 5x5 roto, they don't always have a tendency to, really dive deep into the rules and the nuances of their formats. CJ Abrams, Chris, dealing with back tightness. Now, aside from Joey Meneses, he's about the only Nat I have any interest in. But now that he's got this back tightness, he was kind of like a middle guy, a guy that I was kind of reticent to take, but I would take him if I needed like one more speed guy. But does this worry you now that CJ Abrams has a lingering back thing?
Yeah, if only because the main reason that I'd be targeting Abrams is for stolen bases. And with the Nationals playing for nothing, are you really going to risk having one of your most important young players run a whole heck of a lot, especially early on? Probably not, right? Like, there's no doubt about this guy's talent. I think actually what he did last year, and the numbers weren't great, a 604 OPS, was actually pretty impressive considering how much time he had missed in 2021 and how little experience he had above AA. Like, those are actually pretty solid numbers for someone that young with that little of an experience. But this is very much a long-term play more than somebody that I think you should be targeting in 2023. An IL stash, if that sort of situation happens, I can see that being a decent play. But the fact that he doesn't hit for elite power and the fact that he's going to be, I think even if he is playing a lot, probably hitting at the bottom of a very bad order, or even if he is that leadoff hitter for them, there's just not going to be enough run opportunities and to deal with the fact that he's going to have the volatility of being a second-year player, a young second-year player. And again, the fact that he's dealing with this back issue and the main reason to target him is his chance for stolen bases. All of that basically, long story short, probably a no on CJ Abrams.
Yeah, he's still able to go through hitting and fielding drills right now despite the back, but yeah, just something to keep an eye on. And you make a good point that this guy is such a big part of their rebuild. He was the centerpiece of the return for Soto. And any sort of thing in a non-competitive year, they could shut him down or
absolutely,
or just take it really slow with his recovery. So I'm with you. I took him in one league, Abrams, but I'm probably going to be going elsewhere in that range. Drafts to come. Now, it wouldn't be a spring podcast without a Jordan Walker mention. Chris, he only missed one game, so he was out, I think, last week Saturdays when he injured himself. And he sat Sunday, then he used Monday off day and came back Tuesday. So quite a bit of a scare initially with that shoulder, but only one missed game. Where are you right now on the Jordan Walker hype train?
I mean, like, I'm driving that thing, baby. It is.
That's what I love to hear.
Yeah, his offensive upside is so good. It competes with, like, this is a special group of rookie prospects. Like, Gunnar Henderson's going to be an awesome fantasy option. I think Corbin Carroll's got a chance to be an awesome fantasy option. The fact that Jordan Walker might be the third best rookie of the people we're drafting is insane because this guy has plus power. He has the ability to hit for average. His plate recognition skills are so underrated. He is a good athlete who I think can give you – I talked about this yesterday with RJ Anderson of CBS Sports on our podcast. Does he have elite speed? No, but does he have enough speed to be a guy who could be a 15 to 20 stolen base guy? I think so, and I think the Cardinals might run a little bit more as well. My only issue is just going to be whether or not a team that has some outfield options is really going to have him on the major league roster to start the year. Should they? Yes. And I'm sorry for all the asking myself questions on this podcast. Right. I just noticed I've done it like 20 times. But yeah, he should be on the roster. It's far from a lock. And that's the reason why you have to bump him down at least a little bit. But I'd rather have him on my bench. I can't imagine that there would be guys on your bench that have that kind of offensive upside. Go get Jordan Walker right now.
I'm really excited too. I love obviously he's like a physical specimen, huge guy. And that power, it's just unreal. And so I do worry a little bit about the swing and miss and the hit tool at this stage at 20 years old. But
yeah, sure.
I'd love to he's a guy who could swing leagues, and maybe not to the extent that, Julio Rodriguez did last year, but he could really be huge. And I know that, we should put the caveat that he's not Julio Rodriguez, but
no,
finding that similar path this year as a guy who came into camp with nobody really expecting him to have a chance to make the team. And he's really making a strong case. But apparently the skipper there's Oli Marmol has been happy with what he's seen from Tyler O'Neill in the WBC. So there is still a lot of competition there. We'll see how it works out. Is Dylan Carlson still a guy at all for you?
No. And maybe in like a deep keeper format, just because I think that he's a guy who's probably going to have to change organizations to tap into what he once was. Talent's pretty good, but the fact that he hasn't hit for power at all and just hasn't shown any consistency, there's too many guys that you can get like Dylan Carlson that it would be, if he ends up being the player that he showed he might have been in 2020, I'm not going to kick myself too hard over it. There are just too many options like him. But in a dynasty league, maybe worth keeping around to see if he finally does step into that potential.
Well, I'm glad to hear you're driving the Jordan Walker train because everybody else I talked to at RotoWire seems to be throwing cold water on him.
Oh, come on,
Todd
guys.
and James. But,
they're
too realistic. They're too realistic again.
Realism isn't fun. We're literally playing fantasy baseball. Let's dream, baby.
Exactly. I get that it's harder to be realistic than it is to dream.
Yes.
And I need to, probably take a page out of that book and be more realistic with my initial expectations with these guys. But Walker's just so fun to dream on.
Yeah.
One last thing. We had a question in the chat. First he said great content and insight, so we appreciate that. Then 4 keepers. I think this one looks kind of easy at first glance. 4 keepers. Who should he keep? O'Neal Cruz, Gunnar Henderson, Byron Buxton, Luis Robert, I guess it is, Aaron Judge, and Kyle Schwarber. For me, it's Judge, O'Neal Cruz, Gunnar Henderson, and probably Schwarber. I don't know. Luis Robert, I'm kind of souring on just given all the missed time, and same with Buxton. But what do you think about that one?
I think that it probably a little bit depends on the format. But Henderson and Judge is the obvious answers for me there. I'm probably keeping Cruz and Robert, and it's because it's nothing against Kyle Schwarber. I do have some questions about how that skill set is going to age. The fact that he can DH, I think, will help him quite a bit. I just think that there's a little bit more upside in Robert, and I don't want to call him injury prone just yet. It's worth pointing out he played a full season in 2020. It's not his fault that, unfortunately, the world fell apart and there was a pandemic that prevented him from playing in more games. And O'Neal Cruz, man, that offensive, the ball just jumps off that guy's bat. I realize that swing and miss is so unsustainable in a couple of ways. It's unsustainable in that nobody can swing that much and miss that much. And if he does, it doesn't matter how much hard contact you make. You are not going to be a very good baseball player. And the fact that, I don't think Cruz, as fun as it is to watch a power forward playing shortstop, I'm not sure if he's long for the position. I can see a move to the outfield happening or to third base. And I think that, although a move to third base isn't so bad, third base position, I don't know if you noticed it, Clay, is not a whole heck of a lot of fun to draft anymore. So maybe a move to third base would be a good thing, but the move to the outfield would obviously limit his fantasy stuff. But I think I would go Judge, Henderson, Cruz, and Roberts. All due respect to Byron Buxton, who I just love to death, and Kyle Schwarber, who just hits dingers. Yeah, no, I get where you're coming from. Robert is just kind of getting to that point, not to Mondesi levels, but he's getting to Buxton levels. You're right that he did essentially play a full season in 2020 in the shortened season, but under 100 the past 2 years. That's right. Games played. Well, great stuff, Chris. I owe you one, man, for filling in on the show today. Really appreciate it. Great stuff. Anything else on your mind today as we sign off? No, just, have fun, especially you. You've got a bunch of fun stuff. Like this is as much as I love the regular season and as much as I love, postseason and stuff like that. Draft time is like, as a guy who's covered the MLB draft for a very long time, any type of draft, I'm always going to be interested in it. And, have fun. Fantasy baseball can bring us all together, and it's a wonderful, wonderful thing. Absolutely. I'm looking forward to it. And I'm looking forward to just walking around New York, like a bit of a fish out of a water here in New York. But it's fun, man. It's got this weird energy in the air. I might have to go to the Garden for the first time. I've walked by it, but I've never actually been inside the Garden. Same. I have never been inside it as well. I've been at the train station next to it many a time, but I have not actually been inside the Garden. That'd be fun. Yeah, I think the Nuggets play the Knicks tomorrow, so maybe I'll go to that. Ooh, there you go. Thanks so much, Chris. We are sponsored by Fantrax and Underdog. Please support them, and we hope you'll join us next week on the RotoWire Fantasy Baseball